In the depths of space, where silence reigns supreme and darkness swallows light, there exists a universal truth that every species learns eventually. Never corner a creature you don't fully understand. The Zephyrian Empire, masters of 300 star systems and conquerors of dozens of civilizations, believed themselves apex predators in the cosmic food chain. Their crystalline warships had never tasted defeat, their plasma cannons had never failed to reduce worlds to ash, and their arrogance had never been challenged by anything more threatening than a diplomatic protest. But on a forgotten mining station orbiting a dying star, something unprecedented was about to happen. A single distress beacon would pierce the void, carrying with it a message that would shake the foundations of galactic power. The transmission would reach a species the Zephyrians had dismissed as primitive, backward, and utterly inconsequential. A species that called themselves humans. The Zephyrians were about to learn that in the vast ocean of space there are always bigger fish. And some of those fish have very, very long memories. What happens when unstoppable force meets immovable object? The universe was about to find out, one burning warship at a time. The mining station Kepler 442 had seen better days. Much better days. What had once been a gleaming testament to human engineering now resembled a patchwork of repairs held together by determination and prayer. The station's outer hull bore the scars of countless meteor strikes, and several sections had been sealed off entirely after structural failures. But it still functioned, still pulled precious minerals from the asteroid belt surrounding the dying red giant that provided barely enough warmth to keep the ice from forming on the viewports. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the station's observation deck watching the automated mining drones dance their eternal ballet among the floating rocks. Each drone was worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. But out here in the frontier, they were just tools. Expensive, irreplaceable tools that kept 43 souls fed and the Earth Colonial Authority happy with their quarterly reports. The station housed a mixed crew of humans, Cathari traders, and a handful of other species that had found common ground in the simple pursuit of making a living. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and in a galaxy where honest work was becoming increasingly rare, that meant something. Chen had been running mining operations for 12 years, and she prided herself on keeping her people safe. The frontier was dangerous enough without taking unnecessary risks. Pirates occasionally swept through the system looking for easy targets, but Kepler 442 was so far off the beaten path that most criminals couldn't be bothered with the fuel costs. The station's defensive capabilities consisted of exactly 3 outdated plasma turrets and a prayer that nobody would ever test them. That prayer was about to be tested. The first sign of trouble came at 0347 station time, when Communications Officer Martinez looked up from his console with a frown that made Chen's stomach drop. Martinez had been monitoring deep space frequencies for 8 years, and Chen had learned to read his expressions like weather patterns. "Commander, I'm picking up something unusual on the long-range sensors," Martinez said, his fingers dancing across his control interface. Multiple contacts, bearing 27 Mark IV, approximately 6 million kilometers out and closing. Chen moved to stand behind Martinez's chair, studying the sensor display over his shoulder. The contacts appeared as small blue dots against the starfield backdrop, but something about their formation made her uneasy. They were moving in perfect coordination, maintaining precise distances from each other in a pattern that spoke of military discipline. How many contacts? Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer would be bad news. 12 confirmed, possibly more behind them. They're maintaining radio silence. But their drive signatures, Martinez paused, running the data through the computer's identification systems. "Commander, the computer's coming up blank. These aren't any ships in our database." That was definitely bad news. The Earth Colonial Authority maintained extensive records of every known vessel type in human space, along with detailed files on most alien ships they'd encountered through trade or diplomacy. If the computer couldn't identify these contacts, it meant they were dealing with either completely new technology or someone who had gone to great lengths to mask their true identity. Chen activated the station's intercom system. "All department heads to the command center, Priority Alpha. This is not a drill. Within minutes, the station's senior staff had assembled in the cramped command center. Chief Engineer Patel arrived still wiping grease from his hands, while Security Chief Okafor appeared with the brisk efficiency of someone who had expected this day to come eventually. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the station's xenobiologist and unofficial diplomat, entered last, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "Here's the situation," Chen began without preamble. "We have multiple unknown contacts approaching our position. They're maintaining military formation and radio silence, which suggests hostile intent. Our defensive capabilities are limited, and evacuation isn't an option with our current transport capacity." The reality of their situation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kepler, 442's emergency evacuation shuttles could carry maybe 15 people, and only if they were willing to risk an overloaded flight to the nearest inhabited system. With 43 souls on board, the mathematics of survival were brutally simple. "What about sending a distress signal?" Dr. Tanaka asked. "The Colonial Authority maintains patrol routes through this sector. The nearest CA patrol is 3 weeks away at minimum," Martinez replied, consulting his communications logs. "But I can send a signal. It might deter whoever's out there if they think help is coming." Chen nodded. "Do it. Send a general distress signal on all frequencies, include our station registry and current situation." As Martinez began transmitting their plea for help, the unknown contacts continued their relentless approach. The sensor display updated every few seconds, showing the hostile formation growing larger and more defined. Chen found herself wondering what they had done to deserve this attention. "Kepler." 442 wasn't particularly valuable, and they had no military significance whatsoever. The answer came 40 minutes later, when the attacking fleet finally deigned to break radio silence. The voice that crackled through the station's communications system was unlike anything Chen had ever heard. It possessed a crystalline quality that seemed to resonate through the speaker system, each word precisely enunciated with an accent that suggested vocal cords designed for different purposes than human speech. "You are trespassing in territory claimed by the Zephyrian Empire. Your presence here violates Imperial Decree 7749, which grants exclusive mineral rights to this system to properly civilize species." Chen felt her blood pressure spike. She had reviewed the territorial charts before taking this assignment, and Kepler 442 was well within the boundaries of human space. These Zephyrians, whoever they were, had no legitimate claim to this system. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of Mining Station Kepler." 442, she replied, activating the transmitter. "This system falls under the jurisdiction of the Earth Colonial Authority. We have legal mining rights granted by treaty with the local governments." The response came after a pause that suggested the aliens were either consulting among themselves or simply didn't care about human legal documents. "Human territorial claims are not recognized by the Zephyrian Empire. Your species lacks the evolutionary advancement necessary for resource stewardship. You will evacuate this system immediately or face the consequences of your primitive stubbornness." The sheer arrogance of the statement left Chen momentarily speechless. She had dealt with difficult alien species before, but this level of casual dismissal was something new. These Zephyrians apparently viewed humans as some kind of lower life form, unworthy of basic diplomatic courtesy. "We are a civilian mining operation with 43 people on board." Chen tried again, keeping her voice level despite her rising anger. "We pose no threat to anyone. There's no need for hostilities. Your compliance is not requested, human. It is demanded. You have 1 hour to begin evacuation procedures. Any vessels remaining in the system after that time will be destroyed." The communication channel went dead, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Chen stared at the speaker as if it might suddenly announce that this was all some kind of elaborate joke. When no such announcement came, she turned to her staff. "Options?" she asked simply. Chief Engineer Patel spoke first. "The evacuation shuttles can't carry everyone, and even if they could, we'd never reach safe harbor before those ships caught us. Their drive signatures suggest much more advanced propulsion than anything we have. Dr. Security Chief Okafor added, "Our defensive systems might buy us some time, but against 12 ships, we'd be lucky to last 5 minutes in a real fight." Dr. Tanaka had been studying the sensor readings during the conversation. "Commander, I'm reading some interesting data on their ship configurations. These vessels appear to be using crystalline hull plating, which suggests they're from somewhere in the Andromeda spiral arm. That's incredibly far from here. Which raises the question of why they've come so far for a relatively minor mining operation. If these aliens had traveled from another spiral arm of the galaxy, they possessed technology far beyond anything humanity had encountered. That made their demands even more puzzling. Why would such an advanced civilization care about a small mining station? Martinez, any response to our distress signal? Nothing yet, Commander. But I did pick up something interesting. This signal was relayed through several communication networks, including some I don't recognize. It's possible our message reached further than intended." Before Chen could respond, the proximity alarms began screaming throughout the station. The sensor display showed the alien fleet had accelerated, closing the remaining distance at a rate that defied conventional physics. Whatever propulsion technology they were using, it made human engines look like steam-powered boats. "Time to contact?" Chen asked, though she suspected the answer would be measured in minutes rather than hours. 18 minutes at current velocity, Martinez replied, his voice tight with stress. Chen made a decision that would echo through galactic history, though she had no way of knowing it at the time. "All hands, prepare for emergency protocols. Seal the non-essential sections and route all power to life support and communications. Martinez, keep transmitting our distress signal on all frequencies." "Commander," Dr. Tanaka said quietly, "there's something else." The ship configuration suggests these Zephyrians have encountered other species before. The way they dismissed our territorial claims, their assumption that we would simply comply, this isn't their first conquest. The implications of that statement settled over the command center like a shroud. If the Zephyrians had done this before, it meant there were other species out there who had faced similar ultimatums. It also meant that somewhere in the galaxy, civilizations had learned to fear the sight of crystalline ships approaching their worlds. The alien fleet continued their approach with the confidence of predators who had never encountered prey capable of fighting back. Their formation never wavered. Their communication remained coldly professional, and their ultimatum stood unchanged. They had given the humans 1 hour to evacuate, and they clearly had no intention of showing mercy to anyone who remained. What the Zephyrians didn't know was that human distress signals had a way of reaching unexpected destinations. Martinez's transmission had bounced through relay stations, emergency networks, and communication arrays spanning dozens of star systems. The message was spreading through human space like wildfire, carrying with it the coordinates of Kepler 442 and the details of the alien threat. In the depths of space, other ships were beginning to change course. As the final minutes ticked away before the Zephyrian deadline, Commander Chen stood in the observation deck once more, watching the alien ships grow larger against the starfield. The crystalline vessels were beautiful in their own terrifying way, their hulls catching and reflecting the dying light of the red giant. She had no illusions about what would happen next. The Zephyrians had made their intentions clear, and they possessed the firepower to carry out their threats. But something nagged at her about their behavior. Advanced civilizations didn't usually waste time with ultimatums unless they had a reason to prefer compliance over conflict. Perhaps these aliens weren't as confident as they appeared. Perhaps they had encountered resistance before and learned that negotiations, even failed ones, were sometimes preferable to immediate violence. Or perhaps they simply enjoyed watching their victims squirm before the inevitable end. The answer would come soon enough. In the distance, Chen could see the first flickers of weapons charging as the Zephyrian fleet prepared to make good on their promise. She had done everything she could to protect her people, but sometimes everything wasn't enough. The mining station Kepler 442 was about to become the first human installation to fall to Zephyrian aggression, but it would not be the last. The Empire had tasted easy victory against dozens of species, and they saw no reason why humanity should be any different. They were about to learn otherwise. The Zephyrian flagship Crystalline Sovereign hung in space like a monument to imperial arrogance, its angular hull plates refracting starlight into prismatic displays of color that served no purpose beyond intimidation. Fleet Commander Zarthek stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed in a gesture of barely contained impatience as he observed the pathetic human mining station through the viewport. Zarthek had overseen the conquest of 17 different species during his 500-year military career, and he found the process increasingly tedious. The pattern was always the same: issue ultimatum, observe primitive panic, deploy minimum necessary force, claim territory for the Empire. The humans would be no different from the Altarians, who had begged for mercy while their cities burned, or the Kethmari, who had actually tried to negotiate despite possessing technology barely above stone tools. "Status report," Zarthek commanded, his crystalline vocal cords producing the harmonic tones that marked him as high-caste Zephyrian nobility. Subcommander Velthar consulted his tactical display with the efficiency of someone who had performed this ritual countless times before. The human facility has 43 life signs. Their defensive capabilities consist of 3 obsolete plasma turrets that would be destroyed by our point defense systems before they could achieve target lock. Their evacuation capacity appears limited to approximately 15 individuals. Zarthek felt a familiar surge of contempt for species too primitive to properly value their own lives. And their response to our ultimatum? They transmitted a distress signal on multiple frequencies, as expected. The nearest human military assets are weeks away. Some communication chatter suggests they believe help is coming, but their naval records indicate no significant fleet presence in this sector. The fleet commander moved to his command chair, a throne-like structure carved from a single piece of Zephyrian battle crystal that had been passed down through his family for generations. Each facet of the crystal contained the preserved essence of enemies his ancestors had defeated, their final moments captured forever in the mineral matrix. Soon he would add the humans to that collection. "Tactical analysis of human military capabilities?" Zarthek inquired, though he suspected the answer would be as disappointing as always. "Primitive kinetic weapons, basic energy shields, crude nuclear fusion drives," Velthar reported. "Their largest vessels appear to be cargo haulers converted for military use. Intelligence estimates suggest they have achieved faster-than-light travel only within the last century. By Imperial standards, they are barely past the Stone Age." This assessment aligned with everything Zarthek had observed during his brief study of human civilization. They were a young species, aggressive but technologically backward, scattered across perhaps 50 star systems with no central authority worth recognizing. Their greatest achievement appeared to be the development of coffee, a beverage that had actually gained some popularity among certain Zephyrian trade castes. The humans had no concept of true warfare, no understanding of the forces that shaped galactic politics, and no appreciation for the natural order that placed evolved species like the Zephyrians at the top of the cosmic hierarchy. They were children playing with toys, blissfully unaware that adults had business to conduct. "Fleet status?" Zarthek asked, settling back into his command chair as he prepared for another routine conquest. "All 12 vessels report ready for combat operations. Weapon systems are charged, shields are at maximum efficiency, and drone complements are armed and prepared for deployment." The human facility represents no significant threat to any vessel in the fleet. The Zephyrian Imperial Navy had perfected the art of overwhelming force over millennia of conquest. Each ship in his fleet could single-handedly destroy most planetary defense networks, and together they represented enough firepower to reduce entire moons to component atoms. Using such force against a mining station was like crushing an insect with a warhammer. But the Empire had learned that decisive shows of force prevented costly resistance movements from forming later. "Communications broadcast final warning to the human facility," he ordered. The transmission officer, a young Zephyrian whose crystalline skin still showed the blue tints of adolescence, activated the communication array. "Channel open, Fleet Commander. Zartek composed himself in the manner befitting his rank and breeding, drawing upon centuries of inherited arrogance as he addressed the doomed humans. Attention, human mining facility. This is Fleet Commander Zartek of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. Your evacuation deadline has expired. You have chosen to resist the lawful authority of the Empire. Your facility will now be destroyed as an example to other primitive species who might consider similar acts of defiance. The response from the human commander came faster than expected, transmitted with a degree of composure that surprised Zartek. Most species dissolved into panic or desperate pleading at this stage of the proceedings. Fleet Commander, this is Commander Chen of Kepler, 442. We are a civilian facility with no military significance. Our distress signal has been received by Earth Colonial Authority forces, and our destruction would constitute an unprovoked act of war against the human government. Zartek found himself momentarily amused by the humans' attempt at diplomatic maneuvering. The idea that these primitives could pose any threat to the Zephyrian Empire was laughable, but he appreciated the courage it must have taken to issue such a warning while facing certain death. Human Commander, your government's reaction to your fate is irrelevant to Imperial policy. We have conquered civilizations far more advanced than your own. Your species' response to this demonstration will determine whether we choose to exterminate you quickly or slowly. The communication channel fell silent for several seconds, and Zartek imagined the human commander struggling to process the magnitude of her situation. It was a moment he had experienced many times before, that instant when a primitive mind finally grasped the true scope of the forces arrayed against it. When the human responded, her voice carried a tone that Zartek had never encountered before from a member of a conquered species. Fleet Commander, I want you to remember something. My name is Sarah Chen. I am a citizen of Earth, a daughter of humanity, and the commanding officer of 43 souls under my protection. When your empire falls, and it will fall, remember that it began with Kepler 442. Remember that it began with us. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. Sub-Commander Velthar stared at the communication panel as if it had malfunctioned, while the bridge crew exchanged glances of confusion. In 5 centuries of conquest, no member of a primitive species had ever spoken to a Zephyrian fleet commander with such blatant defiance. Zartek felt something he had not experienced in decades: surprise. The human commander's words carried no hint of begging or negotiation, no desperate attempt to buy time or mercy. Instead, she had issued what could only be interpreted as a declaration of war despite possessing no apparent means to wage such a conflict. Fleet Commander, Velthar said carefully, should we interpret that as a rejection of Imperial authority? Zartek stared at the mining station floating serenely among the asteroids, its lights twinkling like stars against the cosmic darkness. Inside that fragile structure, 43 beings had chosen to face annihilation rather than submit to Imperial will. It was unprecedented, fascinating, and ultimately irrelevant to the outcome of this encounter.
Begin bombardment, he ordered.
Target their life support systems first. I want them to understand the consequences of defiance before they die. The crystalline sovereign's main batteries swiveled toward the mining station with mechanical precision. Each weapon contained enough destructive power to level a city, and the targeting systems were so advanced they could strike individual rooms within the human facility. This would not be a quick death, but a methodical demonstration of Zephyrian superiority. The first salvo struck Kepler 442's outer hull with surgical accuracy, severing power conduits and breaching non-critical sections. The station's lights flickered as emergency systems engaged, and atmosphere began venting from the damaged areas in ghostly streams of frozen gas. Zartek watched with clinical interest as the humans scrambled to contain the damage. Their emergency response was surprisingly competent, suggesting a level of crisis management training that exceeded his expectations for such a primitive species. They sealed the breached sections, rerouted power around damaged systems, and maintained life support throughout the affected areas. Impressive emergency protocols, Velthar observed. They appear to have extensive experience with system failures. Frontier living, Zarthek replied dismissively. Necessity breeds a certain crude competence among primitive species. Target their communications array next. The second salvo destroyed the mining station's primary communication dish, severing their connection to the outside galaxy. Any final messages they might have wished to send would remain forever unspoken, and their distress signal would carry only the echo of their destruction. But as the Zephyrian fleet continued its methodical bombardment of the defenseless station, none of them noticed the subtle changes occurring on the edge of the sensor grid. Space-time was beginning to ripple in ways that their instruments designed to detect conventional threats were not equipped to recognize. The humans' distress signal had indeed reached its intended destination. Unfortunately for the Zephyrians, that destination was not what they had expected. Deep beneath the surface of Luna, in facilities that existed far below the tourist sites and research stations, emergency protocols were activating that had not been used since the Titan War 40 years earlier. Quantum communication arrays were coming online, broadcasting encoded signals across dimensions that normal physics claimed were impossible to access. Admiral Maria Santos stood in the Strategic Command Center watching as red lights illuminated across displays that had remained dark for decades. She had hoped never to see those lights again, had prayed that humanity's children would never need the weapons their parents had built in desperation and hidden in shame.
"Confirmation from Deep Space Monitoring," reported Captain Torres.
"The attack on Kepler 442 is being carried out by 12 unknown vessels using advanced crystalline technology. Estimated technological superiority significant." Admiral Santos nodded grimly. The protocols were clear, established after humanity's first encounter with a hostile alien civilization during the Titan War. Any unprovoked attack on human civilians by technologically superior aliens triggered an automatic response that bypassed normal chain of command approval. Authorization code confirmed. She announced to the assembled staff, "Operation Deathworld Protocol is now active. All sleeper assets are authorized for immediate deployment." Across human space, ships that had masqueraded as cargo haulers and scientific vessels for decades suddenly shed their disguises. Weapons that violated 17 different galactic treaties powered up from cold storage. Soldiers who had been living normal lives as farmers, teachers, and shop owners received coded messages that activated training they had hoped to forget. The Earth Colonial Authority had learned harsh lessons during humanity's violent climb from their homeworld to the stars. They had discovered that in a galaxy full of ancient civilizations and advanced technologies, survival sometimes required capabilities that peaceful societies preferred not to acknowledge. Fleet Commander Zarthek was about to meet humanity's other face, the one they kept hidden behind treaties and trade agreements and diplomatic smiles. The face that had earned them the whispered designation of Deathworlds among species that knew better than to provoke them. As the mining station Kepler 442 died in the void, its destruction created ripples that would spread far beyond the immediate system. The Zephyrian Empire had chosen to test humanity's resolve, and they were about to discover that some tests have consequences that echo across the galaxy. In the darkness between stars, ancient engines were coming online, and the first ships of the Deathworld fleet were beginning their journey toward Kepler 442. They would not arrive in time to save Commander Chen and her crew, but they would ensure that their sacrifice was not forgotten. The Zephyrian Empire had achieved their objective. They had conquered another primitive species and claimed another star system for their ever-expanding domain. But in doing so, they had also accomplished something else entirely. They had awakened something that had been sleeping in the dark between worlds, something that humanity had hoped never to unleash again. The children of Earth were about to remember why they were feared by species that had been traveling the stars since before their sun had formed. The hunt was about to begin. The first indication that something had gone terribly wrong with the Zephyrian Empire's calculations came exactly 72 hours after the destruction of Kepler 442. Fleet Commander Zarthek was reviewing mining operation reports from newly claimed systems when Subcommander Velthar approached his command chair with the peculiar expression of someone who had discovered information that defied rational explanation. Fleet Commander, we have a situation, Velthar announced, his crystalline voice carrying harmonics of confusion that were distinctly unprofessional for a Zephyrian officer. Zarthak looked up from his reports with mild irritation. The conquest of human space was proceeding exactly according to schedule. 3 additional mining stations had surrendered without resistance upon receiving news of Kepler 442's fate, and 2 human colony worlds had already begun negotiations for peaceful incorporation into the Empire. The psychological warfare aspect of the operation was performing flawlessly. Define situation, Subcommander. Velthar activated the main tactical display, showing a 3-dimensional representation of local space extending out to a radius of 10 light-years. Red markers indicated known Zephyrian positions, blue markers showed human installations that had surrendered, and green markers represented potential targets still under evaluation. What made Zarthek's forearms tense with sudden alertness was the cluster of new contacts that had appeared on the display, marked in ominous yellow and designated as unknown classification. Long-range sensors have detected multiple fleets converging on this system from 8 different vectors, Velthar reported. Initial analysis suggests a minimum of 40 vessels, possibly more. They're approaching at velocities that should be impossible for human technology. Zarthek studied the display with growing unease. The approaching contacts were maintaining formation disciplines that suggested military training, but their drive signatures didn't match anything in the Zephyrian database of human vessels. More disturbing was their apparent coordination across vast distances, implying a communication technology the Empire had not observed during their intelligence-gathering operations. Estimated time to contact? Zarthek inquired, though part of him suspected the answer would be sooner than comfortable. 18 hours for the closest formation, 26 hours for the furthest. Fleet Commander, there's something else. We've been monitoring human communication channels, and the transmissions we're intercepting, they're not using any encryption we've encountered before. It's as if they've activated an entirely different communication network. This information troubled Zarthek more than he cared to admit. Advanced civilizations typically possessed multiple layers of technology, with more sophisticated systems reserved for military applications. If the humans had hidden their true communication capabilities, what else might they have concealed? What is High Command's assessment of the situation? Velthar consulted his command interface, accessing the quantum communication link that connected the fleet to the Empire's central authority on Zephyr Prime. After a moment, his expression shifted to something that might have been concern if displayed by a species capable of more emotional flexibility. High Command reports no significant change in threat assessment. The humans are classified as a primitive species with limited technological development. These approaching fleets are assumed to be cargo vessels and civilian transports attempting to evacuate their populations. Zarthek felt his confidence begin to erode like stone weathered by an acid wind. He had commanded Imperial fleets for 5 centuries, and his instincts had been honed by dozens of successful campaigns against species that had initially appeared more formidable than they actually were. But something about this situation felt fundamentally different from previous conquests. Sub-Commander, I want detailed sensor sweeps of every approaching vessel, full spectrum analysis, drive signature identification, weapon system detection. If these are civilian transports, I want confirmation if they're something else. Understood, Fleet Commander. As Velthar departed to coordinate the sensor sweeps, Zarthek remained alone on the bridge, staring at the tactical display that showed his fleet as a small red cluster surrounded by an ever-growing constellation of yellow unknowns. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether the Empire's intelligence services had provided accurate information about their targets. The humans had surprised him once already with their defiant response to Imperial authority. Commander Chen's final transmission continued to echo in his memory, carrying implications that his training had not prepared him to properly evaluate. Her words had contained none of the desperate bargaining or religious appeals that usually characterize the final communications of conquered species. Instead, she had issued what amounted to a promise of retribution from a species that supposedly lacked the capability to threaten the Empire's smallest patrol vessels. The sensor analysis results arrived 16 hours later, delivered by a visibly shaken Velthar who had spent the intervening time running and rerunning the scans to ensure their accuracy. When he activated the main display to show the new data, Zartek immediately understood why his subordinate appeared so disturbed. Fleet Commander, the approaching vessels are definitely not civilian transports. The tactical display now showed detailed breakdowns of the incoming fleets, with each contact analyzed and categorized according to observed capabilities. What Zartek saw violated every assumption the Empire had made about human technological development. The vessels approaching from the Terran core systems were massive, angular constructions that seemed to have been designed with warfare as their primary purpose. Their hulls incorporated armor plating that absorbed sensor scans rather than reflecting them, and their weapon signatures indicated energy outputs that rivaled Zephyrian battlecruisers. More disturbing were the ships arriving from the outer colonies, sleek, predatory shapes that seemed to twist space around themselves in ways that suggested mastery of dimensional manipulation technologies. Their drive systems were producing gravitational anomalies that the fleet's sensors could barely track, and their approach vectors demonstrated a level of tactical coordination that implied real-time communication across impossible distances. The vessels emerging from the deep range bore no resemblance to any ship design in the Imperial database. They appeared to be grown rather than constructed, their organic curves and biological weapon systems suggesting an integration of technology and biology that the Empire had encountered only among the most ancient and dangerous species in the galaxy. Sub-Commander, Zartek said carefully, please confirm that these sensor readings are accurate. Confirmed, Fleet Commander. I ran the analysis 12 times using different sensor arrays. The readings are consistent across all measurement systems. Zartek moved to his command chair and activated the quantum communication link to High Command. When the connection established, he was greeted by the prismatic visage of Admiral Kethvar, one of the Empire's most senior military commanders and a personal friend of the Emperor himself. Admiral, I must request immediate reinforcement of my position. The humans appear to possess military capabilities significantly beyond our initial intelligence estimates. I have 47 unknown vessels approaching my position, and their technology appears to rival or exceed our own in several key areas. The pause that followed suggested Admiral Kethavar was accessing additional information sources before responding. When he spoke again, his voice carried the crystalline harmonics of official imperial policy rather than personal communication. Fleet Commander, Intelligence Division has confirmed that human military capabilities remain within acceptable parameters for a recently spacefaring species. You have 12 of the Empire's most advanced warships under your command. Any human force should be well within your ability to handle. Admiral, with respect, the sensor data suggests otherwise. These are not the primitive vessels we expected to encounter. Fleet Commander Zartek, you are ordered to engage and destroy the approaching human fleet. The Empire's reputation depends on the successful completion of this operation. Failure is not an acceptable outcome. The communication link terminated, leaving Zartek alone with the terrible realization that High Command either didn't believe his reports or didn't care about their implications. He was expected to engage a fleet of unknown capabilities with forces that had been calculated for fighting a primitive opponent. As if summoned by his thoughts, Velpar returned to the bridge carrying a data tablet that contained what appeared to be additional sensor analysis. His expression had progressed from concerned to genuinely frightened, an emotional state that Zartek had never observed in a Zephyrian military officer. Fleet Commander, we've intercepted human communications from the approaching fleets. The quantum decryption protocols finally managed to break their encryption. Darthik accepted the tablet and began reviewing the translated communications logs. What he read there challenged every assumption he had ever made about the nature of human civilization. The messages spoke of Deathworld protocols and sleeper asset activation and species survival contingencies. They referenced weapon systems with names like Gravity Lance and Quantum Disruptor and Stellar Conversion Device. Most disturbing of all, they contained casualty estimates for acceptable losses during xenocidal engagement scenarios. These were not the communications of a primitive species scrambling to defend their territory. These were the operational orders of a military force that had been specifically designed to fight technologically superior opponents and had apparently been doing so for longer than the Empire realized. Sub-Commander, Zarthek said slowly, access our intelligence files on human history. I want detailed information about their expansion into space, their early encounters with alien species, and any military conflicts they may have participated in. Fleet Commander, our intelligence estimates indicate that humans achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 80 years ago. They have had no significant military conflicts with alien species, and their technology development has followed the standard pattern for recently spacefaring civilizations. Then explain these communications logs, Zarthek said, offering the tablet to his subordinate. Velthar reviewed the intercepted messages with the same growing alarm that Zarthek had experienced. When he finished reading, he looked up at his commander with an expression that suggested he had discovered something fundamentally wrong with their understanding of reality. Fleet Commander, either our intelligence services have suffered a catastrophic failure or the humans have been deliberately concealing their true capabilities for decades. Before Zarthek could respond, the proximity alarms began screaming throughout the flagship. The tactical display updated to show the first human vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, their arrival creating gravitational distortions that registered on sensors designed to detect stellar phenomena. What emerged from the dimensional rifts bore no resemblance to the primitive human vessels the Empire had been prepared to fight. The lead ship alone was larger than 3 Zephyrian battlecruisers combined, its hull covered in weapon systems that defied classification by Imperial tactical computers. Its approach generated energy readings that suggested it was drawing power directly from the quantum foam underlying normal space. Fleet Commander, the communications officer announced with barely controlled panic, we are receiving a transmission from the approaching human fleet. Put it through, Zarthek ordered, though he suspected the message would contain information he would prefer not to hear. The voice that filled the bridge was calm, professional, and utterly lacking in the desperation the Empire had expected from a species facing imperial justice. It carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding forces capable of reshaping star systems. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Admiral Maria Santos of the Terran Defense Force. You have committed an unprovoked act of war against human civilians. You will surrender immediately and submit to judgment for crimes against sentient beings, or you will be destroyed. You have 30 minutes to comply. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in absolute silence. Zarthek stared at the tactical display, watching as more human vessels continued to emerge from faster-than-light travel around his position. Each new arrival increased the disparity between the forces arrayed against his fleet. The Empire had come to conquer a primitive species and claim their territory. Instead, they had discovered that humanity possessed weapons that could threaten the foundations of Zephyrian civilization itself, and the humans were no longer asking for mercy. Admiral Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the TDF Retribution, watching through the primary viewport as the Zephyrian fleet maintained their formation with the disciplined precision of a military force that had never tasted defeat. She recognized the pattern, had seen it in dozens of species that had grown comfortable with technological superiority and forgotten that evolution was a process that never truly ended. The Zephyrians were about to receive their first lesson in human adaptability. Santos had been commanding Terran Defense Force operations for 23 years, ever since the Titan War had taught humanity that the galaxy contained threats that peaceful diplomacy could not address. She had hoped never to activate the Deathworld protocols, had prayed that humanity's children would live in a universe where such weapons remained theoretical, but the destruction of Kepler, Vor 42, had changed everything. 43 civilian deaths might seem insignificant compared to the billions of lives lost during the great wars of galactic history, but those deaths represented something that humanity could not tolerate: the casual dismissal of human life by species that considered themselves superior. Admiral, reported Commander Torres from the tactical station, final fleet elements have arrived and taken position. We have 57 vessels in total, including the deep-range reconnaissance ships and the outer colony fast attack squadrons. Santos nodded, studying the tactical display that showed her forces arranged in a three-dimensional formation that completely encircled the Zephyrian fleet. It was a deployment pattern known as the Deathworld Embrace, designed specifically for engaging technologically superior opponents who had grown overconfident in their abilities. The beauty of the formation lay not in its offensive capabilities, though those were considerable, but in its psychological impact. The Zephyrians were discovering that the primitive humans they had dismissed possessed not only advanced military technology, but also the tactical sophistication to deploy it with devastating effectiveness.
Communications, open a channel to the Zephyrian flagship.
Let's see if we can end this without unnecessary bloodshed. The response came within moments, transmitted with the crystalline precision that marked Zephyrian vocal communication. The alien commander's voice carried undertones of uncertainty that suggested he was beginning to grasp the magnitude of his miscalculation.
Human Admiral, this is Fleet Commander Zarthak of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy.
I must inform you that you are interfering with a lawful Imperial operation. The system you call Kepler 442 has been claimed by the Empire under our sovereign right of expansion. Santos felt a familiar cold anger settle in her chest, the same emotion that had sustained her through the darkest moments of the Titan War when humanity had faced extinction at the hands of species that viewed them as laboratory curiosities. She had learned to channel that anger into focused determination, and today it would serve her well.
Commander Zarthak, this is Admiral Santos of the Terran Defense Force.
The system you attacked is sovereign human territory protected by treaties that your empire has chosen to ignore. The civilians you murdered were under my protection. That makes their deaths a personal matter. The pause that followed suggested the Zephyrian commander was consulting with his staff or perhaps seeking guidance from higher authority. When he responded, his voice carried the mechanical certainty of someone reading from an official script. Admiral Santos, the Zephyrian Empire does not recognize territorial claims made by species that lack the evolutionary sophistication necessary for proper resource stewardship. Your presence here constitutes an act of war against the Empire. You will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Santos exchanged glances with Commander Torres, who responded with the slight smile of someone who had participated in this conversation many times before with many different species. The Terran Defense Force had developed a comprehensive understanding of alien psychology during humanity's expansion into space, and arrogant civilizations always followed predictable patterns of behavior. Commander Zartek, let me explain something about human psychology that your intelligence services apparently failed to include in their briefings. When you kill human civilians and then threaten the people who come to avenge them, you create a situation that can only end one way. Santos gestured to her communications officer, who activated a broad-spectrum transmission that would reach not only the Zephyrian fleet, but also monitoring stations throughout local space. The next few minutes would be recorded and analyzed by dozens of alien civilizations, and the message needed to be absolutely clear. All Zephyrian vessels, this is Admiral Maria Santos commanding the combined fleets of the Terran Defense Force. You have committed murder against human civilians and issued threats against human military personnel. Your actions constitute crimes against sentient beings under the Galactic Conventions, and more importantly, they violate the fundamental principle that human life is not disposable. The tactical display updated to show weapon systems activating across the human fleet. The Zephyrians would be able to detect the energy buildups, would understand that they were facing firepower that exceeded their ability to counter. Santos wanted them to have a few moments to consider their options before those options were permanently removed. You will surrender your vessels immediately and submit to judgment for your crimes, or you will be destroyed. You have 5 minutes to comply. The response came faster than expected, transmitted with the harmonic outrage of a Zephyrian who had never encountered defiance from what he considered a lesser species. Human Admiral, you are addressing the representative of an empire that spans 300 star systems and has conquered dozens of civilizations far more advanced than your own. Your threats are meaningless. You possess 12 vessels against our fleet of similar size. This engagement will demonstrate the futility of primitive aggression against evolved species. Santos found herself genuinely surprised by the Zephyrian commander's confidence. Either their sensors were malfunctioning badly, or their understanding of tactical analysis was even more limited than she had assumed. She activated her personal communication system to address her fleet commanders. All vessels, this is Admiral Santos. The Zephyrians appear to believe they're facing 12 ships instead of 57. Begin a revelation protocol. Let them see what they're really fighting. Across the human fleet, stealth systems that had been masking the true size and capabilities of the assembled vessels began shutting down in carefully orchestrated sequence. Ships that had appeared to be small escort vessels revealed themselves as heavy cruisers. Formations that had seemed to consist of 3 or 4 ships expanded into full battle groups. Weapon systems that had been running in passive mode began charging to combat levels, their energy signatures creating gravimetric distortions that registered on sensors throughout the system. The Zephyrian response was immediate and gratifying. Santos watched through the tactical display as their formation began shifting, expanding from attack formation into defensive posture as their sensors finally processed the true scope of the forces they faced. Emergency communications chatter erupted across their fleet frequencies, suggesting that Commander Zarthek was receiving updates that challenged his understanding of the situation.
Commander Zarthek, Santos transmitted, "Are your sensors functioning properly now?"
I want you to understand exactly what you're facing before we proceed. The silence that followed lasted almost 2 full minutes, during which Santos imagined the Zephyrian command staff struggling to comprehend how badly their intelligence services had failed them. When Zartik finally responded, his voice carried harmonics that suggested genuine shock. "Admiral Santos, our sensors indicate you have 57 vessels in your fleet, including several classes that do not appear in our database of human ship types. How is this possible?" The Terran Defense Force had spent decades developing technologies and strategies specifically designed to counter threats from more advanced civilizations. The Zephyrians were discovering that humanity's apparent primitiveness had been a carefully maintained deception. "Commander, humanity learned an important lesson during our expansion into space. In a galaxy full of ancient civilizations and advanced technologies, survival requires capabilities that peaceful societies prefer not to advertise. What you're seeing now is what happens when a Deathworld species decides that diplomacy has failed." She gestured to Commander Torres, who began transmitting detailed sensor data about human weapon systems to the Zephyrian fleet. The information would be overwhelming and terrifying, showing energy weapons that could crack planets, defensive systems that violated known physics, and propulsion technologies that drew power from dimensions that most species considered theoretical. Your empire made a critical error in judgment, Commander. You assumed that because humanity appeared primitive, we actually were primitive. You failed to consider that a species might deliberately conceal their true capabilities until those capabilities were needed. The tactical display showed the Zephyrian fleet beginning to maneuver, their formation spreading into what appeared to be preparation for retreat. Santos felt a moment of hope that the confrontation might end without the massive loss of life that combat would inevitably produce. That hope died when Commander Zarthek's response reached her bridge. "Admiral Santos, the Zephyrian Empire has never retreated from inferior opponents. Regardless of your technological capabilities, you remain a young species with limited combat experience. Our fleet has conquered civilizations that possessed weapons similar to your own. We will demonstrate the futility of challenging imperial authority." Santos closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle around her shoulders like a familiar cloak. She had given the Zephyrians every opportunity to avoid the coming catastrophe, had shown them exactly what they would be fighting, had offered them terms that would preserve their lives if not their dignity. They had chosen war. "All vessels, this is Admiral Santos. The Zephyrians have refused surrender and appear to be preparing for combat. Weapons free, engage at will. Show them why humanity is feared by species that know better than to test us." The human fleet opened fire with a coordinated precision that turned space around the Zephyrian formation into a hellscape of intersecting energy beams and gravitational disruptions. Weapons that had been theoretical concepts in most civilizations' research databases suddenly became terrible reality as humanity deployed technologies that violated several fundamental principles of accepted physics. The Zephyrian shields, designed to stop conventional energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, proved utterly inadequate against quantum disruptors that attacked matter at the subatomic level. Their crystalline armor, which had protected them through dozens of successful conquests, simply ceased to exist when exposed to weapons that converted mass directly into energy. Within the first 30 seconds of combat, 3 Zephyrian vessels had been completely destroyed and 4 more were crippled beyond hope of repair. The remainder of their fleet attempted to return fire, but their weapons were designed for fighting opponents who followed conventional tactical doctrines. The human ships moved through space in ways that defied prediction, using gravitational manipulation to accelerate in impossible directions and dimensional shifting to avoid incoming fire. Commander Zarthek's flagship, the Crystalline Sovereign, managed to survive the initial assault through a combination of superior shields and desperate maneuvering. Santos watched as the vessel attempted to break free from the human formation, its weapons firing in all directions in a desperate attempt to clear an escape route. She opened a direct communication channel to the fleeing flagship. "Commander Zarthek, this is Admiral Santos. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire sent you to conquer what they believed was a primitive species, and instead you've discovered that humanity has been preparing for this moment for decades. Surrender now, and I'll ensure your survivors receive medical treatment." The response came through static and interference as the Zephyrian flagship's communication systems failed under the sustained assault. "Admiral Santos, my empire will avenge this defeat. You have doomed your entire species. The full might of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy will..." The transmission cut off as the Crystalline Sovereign's final shield generator overloaded, leaving the vessel defenseless against the concentrated fire of a dozen human ships. Santos watched as the pride of the Zephyrian fleet broke apart in a cascade of crystalline debris and escaping atmosphere. In less than 10 minutes, the Zephyrian fleet had been reduced from 12 modern warships to scattered wreckage and a handful of escape pods containing survivors who would carry word of humanity's true nature back to their empire. Santos stared at the tactical display, feeling no satisfaction in the victory. The destruction of Kepler. 442 had been avenged, but the price of that vengeance would be measured in the wars that were now inevitable. The Zephyrian Empire would not accept this defeat passively, and humanity would soon face the full force of a civilization that had conquered 300 star systems. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today the galaxy had learned that humanity was not the primitive species they appeared to be, and that lesson would be remembered by every civilization that had ever considered testing human resolve. The Death World had awakened, and the stars themselves would tremble before its fury. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler, 442, the ripple effects of humanity's revelation were reshaping galactic politics in ways that no one had anticipated. The destruction of Fleet Commander Zarthek's expedition had sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian Empire, but more significantly, it had forced every major civilization in the galaxy to reconsider their assumptions about the species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled delegates of the Galactic Confederation, representing humanity for the first time since the species had been granted observer status decades earlier. The circular chamber buzzed with the multilingual conversations of 200 alien species, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of sounds that would have been overwhelming to anyone not trained in xenological diplomacy. Today's emergency session had been called to address what the Confederation's bureaucrats had euphemistically termed the human situation. Though everyone present understood they were really here to discuss the sudden revelation that one of the galaxy's newest spacefaring species rivaled the oldest civilizations. Honored delegates, Ambassador Vasquez began, her words translated simultaneously into dozens of languages by the Confederation's advanced communication systems. I appear before you today not to justify humanity's actions at Kepler 442, but to ensure that the galaxy understands the principles that guide human behavior. The chamber fell silent as delegates turned their attention to the human representative. For decades, humanity had been a footnote in galactic politics, a young species granted token representation out of courtesy rather than respect. Today, they commanded attention that was born of equal parts fear and curiosity. The Zephyrian Empire attacked a civilian mining station and murdered 43 innocent people. They did this not in pursuit of military objectives or territorial disputes, but out of casual arrogance toward a species they considered inferior. Humanity's response was proportional, decisive, and designed to ensure that such an attack would never happen again. In the Zephyrian delegation section, Ambassador Kethrin rose to address the chamber. His crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights in patterns that indicated barely controlled rage, and his voice carried harmonics of imperial authority that had intimidated alien diplomats for centuries. The human representative speaks of proportional response while ignoring the fact that their fleet slaughtered imperial citizens who were conducting lawful operations in contested space. The primitive violence displayed at Kepler 442 demonstrates exactly why species like humanity require guidance from more evolved civilizations. Ambassador Vasquez had expected this response and had prepared for it during months of consultation with human military analysts, xenopsychologists, and diplomatic specialists. The next few minutes would determine whether humanity would be accepted as a legitimate military power or branded as a dangerous rogue species that required containment. Honored delegates, the Zephyrian ambassador speaks of lawful operations and contested space. I would ask the chamber to review the territorial documentation submitted by both our species. Kepler 442 was within established human space, protected by treaties that the Zephyrian Empire chose to ignore. The attack was not a territorial dispute, but an act of unprovoked aggression. Did? She activated a holographic display that showed detailed star charts, treaty documents, and communication logs from the attack. The evidence was overwhelming and had been compiled with the meticulous attention to detail that humanity had learned was necessary when dealing with bureaucratic alien civilizations. But more importantly, I want the galaxy to understand what actually happened during that battle. The Zephyrian fleet was given multiple opportunities to withdraw. They were offered surrender terms that would have preserved their lives and their dignity. They chose to continue fighting until their fleet was destroyed, and even then, human forces rescued survivors and provided medical treatment. The chamber erupted in multilingual discussions as delegates processed this information. The official Zephyrian reports had claimed that humanity had attacked without warning and shown no mercy to defeated opponents. This directly contradicted the communication logs that Ambassador Vasquez was now presenting as evidence. Representative Takfar of the ancient Altarian hegemony rose to address the chamber. His species had been spacefaring for over 10,000 years and commanded respect from even the most arrogant civilizations. When he spoke, the chamber fell silent. Ambassador Vasquez, the evidence you present raises disturbing questions about the accuracy of information provided by the Zephyrian Empire. However, the Confederation must also address the weapons technologies displayed by your fleet. Several of the systems observed during the battle appear to violate established principles of physics and may represent a threat to galactic stability. Humanity's advanced weapons were indeed based on theoretical physics that most civilizations considered impossible, and their existence would inevitably lead to demands for technology sharing or restrictions on their use. Representative Takfar, humanity's military technologies were developed in response to specific threats encountered during our expansion into space. We have no intention of using these weapons aggressively, but we also will not accept limitations on our ability to defend ourselves and our allies. The statement was carefully crafted to sound reasonable while providing no actual information about human capabilities or limitations. Behind the diplomatic language lay a simple message: humanity would not be disarmed or restricted by species that had allowed the Zephyrian Empire to commit unprovoked attacks. Ambassador Kethrin rose again, his crystalline form now pulsing with the deep red patterns that indicated extreme agitation among his species. The human representative speaks of defensive measures while deploying weapons that could threaten entire star systems. The technology displayed at Kepler 442 represents a destabilizing force that could upset the balance of power that has maintained galactic peace for millennia. Before Ambassador Vasquez could respond, an unexpected voice joined the debate. Representative Zalkun of the Drakmori Collective had remained silent throughout the session, but his species' reputation for military analysis made his opinion particularly significant. Ambassador Kethrin speaks of galactic peace while representing an empire that has conquered dozens of civilizations through unprovoked warfare. The Drakmori Collective has monitored Zephyrian expansion for centuries, and we have documented numerous instances of exactly the behavior that occurred at Kepler 442. The chamber exploded into chaos as delegates realized that one of the galaxy's most respected military powers was effectively supporting humanity's position. The Drakmori had fought the Zephyrian Empire to a standstill during several border conflicts and commanded respect from species that feared Zephyrian aggression. The humans demonstrated tactical sophistication, technological capability, and most importantly, restraint in their response to Zephyrian aggression. They could have pursued the surviving vessels and eliminated them entirely, but chose instead to allow survivors to return to their empire. This suggests a species that understands the difference between justice and vengeance. Ambassador Vasquez felt a surge of gratitude toward the Drakmori representative. His support would carry significant weight with undecided delegations and help counteract Zephyrian attempts to portray humanity as a dangerous rogue species. Representative Zalkun raises an important point, she continued. Humanity has no territorial ambitions beyond our current borders. We seek peaceful coexistence with all spacefaring species. But we will not tolerate unprovoked attacks on our civilians, and we will not accept the premise that advanced civilizations have the right to dictate terms to younger species. The debate continued for several hours, with various delegates raising questions about human military capabilities, territorial ambitions, and long-term intentions. Through it all, Ambassador Vasquez maintained the careful balance between diplomatic courtesy and implicit threat that had become humanity's signature approach to galactic politics. As the session drew to a close, Confederation Secretary General Mordoon called for a preliminary vote on the resolution that would determine humanity's status within the galactic community. The options were stark: full recognition as a legitimate military power, continued observer status with restrictions on military activities, or classification as a threat requiring containment measures. The vote was closer than Ambassador Vasquez had hoped, but decisive enough to establish humanity's. By a margin of 127 to 73, with numerous abstentions, the Confederation granted humanity full military recognition and the right to maintain their current defensive capabilities without external oversight. The Zephyrian delegation walked out in protest, but their departure only emphasized the shift in galactic politics that humanity's emergence had created. The era of unchallenged Zephyrian expansion was over, and every species in the galaxy was now recalculating their strategic positions. As the chamber emptied, Representative Takvar approached Ambassador Vasquez with the slow, deliberate movement that characterized his ancient species. Ambassador, the Altarian hegemony would be interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with humanity. Your species has demonstrated qualities that we respect, and we believe that cooperation between our peoples could benefit both civilizations. Similar approaches came from dozens of other species over the following days. The Battle of Kepler 442 had accomplished something that centuries of peaceful diplomacy had failed to achieve. It had earned humanity a place at the table where galactic powers made the decisions that shaped civilization itself. But perhaps the most significant development occurred 3 weeks after the Confederation vote, when a coded transmission reached Admiral Santos aboard the TDF Retribution. The message came from deep within Zephyrian space, transmitted by sources that identified themselves only as concerned citizens of the Empire. The transmission contained detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military capabilities, strategic planning documents, and most importantly, evidence that significant elements within the Empire opposed the aggressive expansion policies that had led to the attack on Kepler 442. There were Zephyrians who understood that their empire's arrogance was leading toward a war they could not win, and they were willing to provide information that might prevent such a catastrophe. Admiral Santos forwarded the intelligence to Earth's Strategic Command, knowing that it would be analyzed and filed away against the possibility of future conflicts. but she also recognized the deeper significance of the transmission. Humanity had not only earned the respect of potential allies, but had also inspired resistance movements within the civilizations that opposed them. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had become the catalyst for that change. Species that had accepted Zephyrian dominance for centuries were beginning to question whether such dominance was truly inevitable. Civilizations that had never dared to resist imperial expansion were suddenly considering the possibility that superior technology did not automatically guarantee victory. In the depths of space, where the wreckage of Fleet Commander Zarthak's fleet still drifted among the asteroids of Kepler, 442, a memorial beacon transmitted its eternal message to any ships that passed through the system. The message was simple but profound. Here lie the 43 souls of Mining Station Kepler 442, civilians who died because they refused to abandon their home to alien aggression. Their sacrifice reminded the galaxy that humanity will not be conquered, will not be dismissed, and will not forget. The Zephyrian Empire had sought to demonstrate their superiority over a primitive species. Instead, they had awakened a force that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The age of casual conquest was ending, and the age of human resistance had begun. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Battle of Kepler 442 as the moment when humanity announced its presence as a major galactic power. But those who understood the deeper currents of politics and war knew that the battle's true significance lay not in what it had accomplished, but in what it had prevented. The galaxy had learned that there were species among the stars who would not submit to conquest, who possessed the weapons to enforce their independence, and who had the will to use those weapons when peaceful alternatives failed. That lesson would echo through the centuries, shaping the decisions of empires and the fate of civilizations yet unborn. The humans had kept their promise to Commander Sarah Chen. The empire that had destroyed Kepler 442 was indeed falling, brought down not by superior force but by the realization that their age of unchallenged dominance was over. In the end, that was perhaps the most human victory of all, not the destruction of their enemies, but the transformation of their enemies into something better than they had been before.